Hi, this is the Christian Resistance, and my name is Josh Brister. I'm pleased to have a couple of friends on, um, Craig Reed and John Buck. You can both find them on Twitter, and they engage philosophy and theology and everything in between. Great, knowledgeable friends of mine. And basically, I just, for right now, I just want you to just go ahead and introduce yourself to because you're new here. So, Craig, I'd like to start with you. Uh, tell our audience who you are, why you think this is an important topic, important subject, and yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Craig Reed. Most of the people listening will probably know who I am. I have a YouTube channel, Craig Reed TCR, and I'm on Twitter. Sometimes I'm on Twitter sporadically, but I do a lot of since the materialism idealism debate started interesting me about 3 or 4 months ago, since I stumbled upon Bernardo Castro, and it's been something that I've been going back to a lot in my videos and talking about how I really think that materialism is on its way out. And I had a stream, actually. John hooked me up with the man himself, who's an idealist, and he has a book called Materialism is Baloney that goes into detail about the end of materialism. It's we'll go into it as we talk, but basically it's a philosophy that was started a long time ago, wherein mind and matter were arbitrarily separated from each other so that you could study material just as stuff, the internal basic properties of a thing. And it was, it had its moment in the sun. It was really successful in terms of explanatory power, particularly in science, because if you separate something into two categories and you're just studying stuff as, these are the inherent properties of things and we can do experiments on them, that offered a lot in terms of explanatory power. But I think the days that's an outmoded way of looking at things, and I have a lot of different arguments that I've been bringing up on my channels as to why. And I guess that's enough for the start.
Yeah, now I heard about that interview. I watched it, and it was a great interview. And I think that's a great interview you did. Both of you did, and I just want to say good job. But I really want to listen to that. You did. You said a lot of great points in that interview, and I think idealism really shows. It really is the Achilles heel of all this. But I think there's an even better position than idealism. And I'll be trying to maybe give an argument or two for that. It goes along the lines of common sense realism, something that I always like to advocate and defend.
Is that the Thomas Reed? Is that Thomas Reed?
That's right. That's okay. Right. It's a completely different spelling from your last name, so no, you're not related, but it'd be pretty cool if you were. Okay, Mr. John Buck. You're a great intellectual, a friend. Thank you for being on here, and go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the audience why you think this is an important topic for discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm John Buck. Let's see. I'm somebody that's grown deeply interested in philosophy and like learning more about like the way that the world works and what's real and what's not real. That's basically what philosophy is. I'm a fellow recent Catholic convert, like Josh is. But as for like why the question over like materialism or physicalism or like substance dualism, all the various like philosophy of mind in general is important because like consciousness is kind of our starting point for everything else that we might come to know. And so like if we can figure out what consciousness is, like how to properly characterize it in a way that's correct, like how it's accurately so that we're accurately apprehending reality, but used in regards to this sort of like basic thing that we all have. We're all conscious. And so if we can figure out consciousness through philosophy, then that's going to be one of the most significant sort of things that we can have at our disposal in like, I don't know, in our tools for facing reality, at least our intellectual tools. So I'm not an idealist, right? I was for a little while, or at least sort of flirting with it. As of late, I've sort of taken on a sort of panpsychist position. I'm sort of like trying it out for style. There's some aspects that I like about it that, plus I think like whether I was a naturalist or a theist or anything like that, I think it would just be a better account of consciousness. But we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we go forward.
Now, I guess since you're a Catholic, you are a theist. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's true.
Just wanted that clarification. Okay. Anyway, so what do you do with the skeptic who says that matter is all there is? Craig, I'm a skeptic. I'm an atheist. Matter is all there is, and
Well,
we
it's
should
entirely
do away.
possible. One of the things that I've been trying to move away from, like I'm somewhat sympathetic to dualism, but I don't like to preach it or talk about it because you're setting yourself up to try and prove something that is basically just as hard to prove as God. If you're going to prove a soul,
Uh-oh.
so you can be
Yeah.
a materialist in the sense of like, there I am. What?
Yeah,
Am I gone?
you
We
cut out
lost-
for a second, but you're back. Yeah.
Yes.
You can be a materialist. Like I'm trying to meet atheists more where they're at. So you can be a materialist more in the sense of like you don't believe in anything supernatural until proven to you. Fine. So it's just material processes. But even if you strip stuff to just material processes, you have material stuff and then the phenomena of stuff. So you can still be an idealist because you still have a problem in terms of how things present themselves in consciousness is actually somewhat different than how things actually are. The noumena, the phenomena noumena distinction that I talk about a lot is a real thing. So like you can still think that it's only physical things out there in the world until proven otherwise. But you still kind of have to start with consciousness as your ontological primitive, as your starting point. I mean, what you just mentioned, I'd like to hear about too, because I'm open to other types of philosophies. I just don't think, like, I'm sympathetic to panpsychism too, but panpsychism is more a theory of consciousness than an actual philosophy. Like, idealism and panpsychism, as far as I'm concerned, some people disagree with me, but I would say they can both be true at the exact same time.
Yep.
Because panpsychism is more just how consciousness arises and presents itself. So that's what I would say for now, but I'm very curious as to your common sense realism because I'm also sympathetic to Donald Hoffman's conscious realism, which is also a form of idealism, but it's just starting with consciousness as your starting point, as your ontological primitive, which makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, that's great. I was looking for the quote by Thomas Reed. I just had it. Yes, here it is. And you know me, I always love to bring up quotes in my discussions. That's because I do a lot of research, and they say it better than I do. So this is Thomas Reed in his inquiry, an inquiry into the human mind on the principles of common sense. This is his landmark 1764 trilogy. He had a trilogy of books. This is his first, and he published it when he was like 54 years old. If you publish anything today at 54, I mean, that wouldn't happen. So he was a full professor before he published it in such a late stage of life. This is what he says, and I quote, and I want you to, Craig, this pertains to what you're saying. This is Thomas Reed. Conjectures and theories are the creatures of men and will always be found unlike the creatures of God. If we would know the works of God, we must consult themselves with attention and humility, without daring to add anything of ours to what they declare. A just interpretation of nature is the only sound and orthodox philosophy. Whatever we add of our own is apocalyptical and of no authority. He's basically talking about the views of Berkeley and Locke and David Hume, how they don't deal with what we see. They don't deal with direct realism, but they have something called a representational view of reality, where
Right. Yeah.
the only
That's
thing
where idealism has trouble. Like, I don't know if you didn't watch I'm very curious on John's take on this too, but where Bernardo Kastrup goes a little too far as I'm concerned, is he seems to have gone almost completely that the real world is just a manifestation of consciousness. And I don't believe that. I believe there is an objectively verifiable real world that exists. You know, like there's a table in front of me that's there when I go to sleep at night and it stays there. But how it presents itself as consciousness, how it is different. There's a variation between what it is objectively comprised of and how I perceive it. That's why I think idealism needs to be the starting point. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead. I think that makes sense. That made sense, right?
Yeah, I followed you.
Okay.
do you want to say anything about that, John?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure Bernardo Kastrup would be quite frustrated with your sort of like dismissal of his actual position. Well, it's like, because like, yeah, Bernardo Kastrup, he's trying to sort of like present an entire metaphysic or an entire ontology of like what exists. And so he thinks that like, well, the best account for this is going to be only mental subjects and their representations that they produce. And that's like a sufficient account for all of reality, all of our experience. Everything that this is going to fall into either mental subjects or their mental representation. That's the idealist sort of picture of reality. I'm not really an idealist, but I'm sympathetic. I definitely like the fact that it has this sort of simplicity to it, where you can sort of account for everything using only one type of substance, that being mental substances, and then their properties that they have, like their representations that they have. But I definitely am sympathetic as a panpsychist in holding to mentality as sort of fundamental to reality. Like consciousness isn't made up out of something unconscious. That's just something that the panpsychist and the idealist will agree upon.
Yeah, totally.
And you're exactly right too. The panpsychist and the idealist, these aren't mutually exclusive positions. Like the panpsychist, all they're saying is that, okay, if there's something that exists, it's gonna have something it's like to be that thing. And the idealists, they're gonna be committed to that position as well, because they think that, well, the only things that exist are immaterial mental subjects and their properties. They're gonna want to also say that there are no physical properties that exist independent of minds. So yeah, and the panpsychists accept that, and so be an idealist panpsychist, or they might want to retain some sort of like property dualism or neutral monism of some sort. And yeah.
Well, we have a guest with us that just joined us, Ronald, and I just want to say hello, Ronald, and thank you for joining us, even if it's a little late. No worries. Thank you. We're discussing why materialism is dead or on its way out, and I did this with everybody here. Can you introduce yourself? Because you're new here, but one of the reasons I brought you on is because you are we follow each other, and I think you're intellectual and you're a Christian. So why don't you introduce yourself and say, and why do you think this topic is important, and why do you think it's something that our listeners should know about?
Well, my name's Ronald. I'm just a carpenter, but I like to study a lot of things. And about 3 years ago, the Lord got a hold of me and took me in a wild journey. But I've always studied intellectual stuff, and I've always felt there was more to reality than just stuff. And my experience of reality was certainly not something you can measure. and not nothing as well. But I think it's important because we can't reduce a human being to just stuff, and we can't reduce reality to just stuff. And so, if we try to do that, we can't even access, I would say, reality properly.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. That's one of my main arguments against materialism. I call it the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, and it's not just me. I didn't make that up. It comes from Ed Feser's book, Aristotle's Revenge, and it's just a fallacy when you try to when you say reality is just the sum total of quantity, of weight, of measurement, length, height, and so forth, and so in physical properties. It's taking that out of the real world, or the world as we perceive it to be. So that's why it's misplaced. The fallacy of misplaced concreteness. So I don't think you can reduce so many facets of lived life. This is by the way, what Thomas Reid means by common sense. This view or emphasis for the empiricist or the materialist to reduce lived life to a world of theory. That's hence that quote I gave on theories are the ways of men. We don't live by theory. We live by lived life, and unless we have a defeater for what we perceive as being generally true, well, we're in our epistemic. We have an epistemic justification for what we perceive through our senses, but that's the fallacy of misplaced concreteness that Ed Feser and others give, trying to reduce lived life to chemical or physical processes. Is that what you were? What your main argument that you just gave, Ronald? What was that it?
I would say that's pretty much it. I mean, you can't reduce reality to just stuff. Like I think you pretty much hit what I was saying.
Yeah. I remember I was discussing with Dr. Oppie, and he mentioned the electromagnetic spectrum about our perception of things, but there's things that's a basic naturalistic argument that to say our perception is just can be interpreted in a physicalistic way as simply our perception of the magnetic spectrum, instead of our perception of yellow or red or of flowers or of the world. So I think that's a serious objection to materialism. It doesn't explain the richness of lived life, the explanatory richness. So that would probably be one of my main arguments. Craig, what do you think about? Well, first of all, what we were discussing before Ronald came in about idealism and panpsychism. Mm-hmm. I think there's another way, another viewpoint, and that's a common sense Aristotelianism. Now, I've been looking at this book. I should have it with me. the Cambridge Companion to Thomas Reid. I've been reading it some, and it's so striking how Thomas Reid is so close to Aristotle on many of these things, and Thomas Aquinas. So I think that's another way of looking at it. When I say common sense, and what I think what Thomas Reid meant by common sense is basically an Aristotelian understanding of reality. I think that is a better approach than idealism. But I do think idealism, simply destroys materialism also.
Well, the thing that I always say is that if the choice is binary between materialism and idealism, idealism wins hands down. And part of the reason is what I was talking about originally, because there is stuff and then there is the manifestation of stuff in consciousness, and there's a discrepancy between the two. So there are things that you can't even know according to the physical properties of a thing. Like what I've been talking about on my channel is there's the object-based ontology to an item, which is basically its material essence, and then there's a context-based ontology, one of which is how it presents itself in consciousness. So the example I always use is like the desk in front of me is actually presents to me as solid matter, but it's actually electrons in motion, and materialists would never know that. And what color something is, a materialist could never tell you, even though technically you could figure out what color something is. But if the choice is binary, materialism is insufficient to explain all of the attributes of life. What I would say to what you just said, I agree with almost everything you just said. There's the hard problem of consciousness, which is like, in principle, phenomenal consciousness seems at least in principle irreducible to just physical properties and physical correlates. Now, it might turn out not to be, but as far as I'm concerned, idealism and Aristotelianism aren't. They did a stream that I watched where it was called like Thomist idealism, and I think Christian idealism was on that. And I was hoping there was somebody on there who was a Thomist and sympathetic to idealism, who could kind of show me where they two can be reconciled, because I'd be perfectly willing to do that. I'm not really married to idealism. I just think it's a better starting point. I consider it more of a philosophy and an interpretive framework that works better. I can see whatever it is you mean by Aristotelianism. I can see that fitting into it comfortably. But
that it has something. Things have causal powers. Material substances have causal powers. I think that's the real Achilles heel. I think Aristotelianism is the real Achilles heel of atheism. Also, but that's that's going a little far. Craig, do you have anything to say about the panpsychism, the idealism, and the Aristotelianism? Like, why do you? I'm sorry. Do you have anything to say about that, or what Craig just said? Or do you want to move this?
Do you mean John or me?
No, I'm actually curious.
Oh yes, John. John.
Well,
yeah, you said Craig. Do you have anything to say about what Craig said?
I'm sorry.
Well, when Craig said that, I thought it was actually brilliant when he made the point.
But maybe I was thinking both you are Craig. Craig 1 and Craig 2.
John is a mini me.
I am basic.
John is becoming like me.
I'm mini Craig. Yeah. I'm actually curious on Ron's position. I know it would be kind of interesting if we have a sort of like 4 different theories of consciousness laid out here, because it seems like Josh is sort of laying out or like supporting the hylomorphist Aristotelian sort of position on the philosophy of mind. I'm supporting the panpsychist position. Craig is for idealism. Now I want to know what Ron's position is.
Well, I'm in the idealist camp.
Okay.
I would call myself a Christian idealist. And here's the thing. I'm not as familiar with Aristotelianism, like I couldn't articulate it, but I'm more familiar with Platonism. And I reject Platonism, the hard Platonism. and I reject a hard dualism
Hmm.
because I don't think it works with reality, and I don't think it works particularly with scripture.
Hmm.
But I like idealism because it puts consciousness as an ontological primitive, but it doesn't separate consciousness from physical reality altogether. And if you're talking about consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness, so to speak, because the brain and your inner state do correlate strongly, but not completely. So your body has a part to play. Your brain, your physical brain, has a part to play, but it's not all of it. I like what Castrop says about the brain filter idea. But obviously, I don't think that material reality explains your whole experience. But I don't think because also, from the Christian perspective, if it was just a hard dualism, then I think that argues against the necessity of the incarnation.
Interesting. Okay, you'll have to elaborate on that then. Because, like, suppose I'm a Cartesian duelist or something like that, and a Christian.
Yeah.
Like, what reason would I have to, like, accept some sort of, like, or why would those two positions sort of, like, make the necessity of the incarnation not something that should necessarily had to happen or something like that?
Well, it doesn't exclude necessarily the incarnation. To say, I like the Cartesian from I think, therefore I am, but I don't like the Cartesian idea of hard dualism because it doesn't comport with our lived experience. We can't completely separate our mind and body.
Mm-hmm.
There is separation, but not a complete separation, right? So I like that there is some dualism there, but not a hard dualism. Mm-hmm. I like dualism, but not a hard dualism. I think that, and then, okay, so a lot of my idealism is from Castrop, my technical articulation of idealism, but he's helping me make sense of things I already believed. And so, like, with idealism, as Castrop is explaining it, consciousness, in order to be localized, has to be embodied.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the incarnation, right?
I see.
So if you say God is the one mind, or the however you want to call that, the main consciousness of all reality, in order for God to interact with us under this ideal, he has to be localized. So therefore the incarnation.
I see. Yeah, and that, I guess, fits pretty squarely with the, like, early Gnostic heresies in the beginning of the church, where they would hold to a sort of... No, I'm not saying that idealism fits with that. I'm saying, like, the reason that Christians rejected the Gnostics was because they held to a spiritual incarnation. And the Gnostics also had this sort of, like, strict Platonistic dualism, where you have the mind and the body as two very distinct things, where they... even going so far as to say that the body is a sort of evil creation from the demiurge and not something created by God. It's something that we're, like, forced into, and then we have to, like, escape the body, which is definitely anti-Christian. So yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry for the mix up there. But yeah, I get what you're saying, though, that with a hard dualism akin to either the Gnostic Platonists or the Cartesian Duelists, then you could have that sort of concern where, oh, well, all Jesus would have to do is to be a spiritual incarnation. Or like, maybe if you think that there is a sort of strict divide between the spiritual and the physical, then, like, could a purely immaterial being really become incarnate in a strong sort of sense? And, like, I guess it would be a sort of concern about, like, whether the physical world could be purified by the incarnation, if the physical world is something that is not integratable to the immaterial world. I don't know. There's a few thoughts there, but I'm kind of...
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Welcome back, Craig.
Yeah, but the StreamYard bounce starts to happen.
I gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
In
I've
a
been
sense,
trying
all
to bring you
Christians,
back.
in a sense, all Christians are types of idealists, because we all believe that God is the, you know, if you just God and mind of God are inseparable. So we're
Yeah.
all, in a sense, idealists to one degree
Yeah.
or another. That's why I
Yeah.
latched onto it, because it's so easy to dovetail with Christianity. I was actually surprised at how easily Bernardo Castro was like, yeah, I'd love to be responsible for a religious revival in the West, and I'd love to be, you know, I was really surprised by that when we were interviewing him.
Yeah, I think he sees the the growing a facade happening, the secular facade uh, of people, some people in some countries in Western Europe getting away from this traditional Christian, Judeo-Christian understanding, and looking at the world, the secularization thesis,
Yeah,
basically. I
he
think
sees a
he's
downside to it for sure. He said the
yeah,
lack of transcendence in everyday life that he thought was there in like 1600s. You go to a church and the transcendent is a part of your everyday life, and he thinks that that's a net positive for people, even if he doesn't necessarily agree with all the tenets of organized religion. That's what I heard, anyways. John, is that what you thought?
Mm-hmm.
well,
Yeah.
I want to ask you something about that interview, because I'm not sure. Um, in that interview, I'm not sure he would say that idealism accounts for a person's um, consciousness, like an individual person's consciousness.
Right.
Um,
He's got
and
a. I didn't go into it in the interview, but because I know it really well, because I've read his books and I've listened to a lot of his interviews. But he has a whole theory of that there's a universal mind or an omni consciousness, a
yeah,
universal consciousness, and you, me, John, and Ron are all individual consciousnesses within that stream of consciousness, kind of like a whirlpool within a waterfall. A whirlpool within an
yeah,
ocean. So there's an and he has a whole theory that he goes into in his books, that he likens it to multiple personality disorder, where like there's a one omniconscious and like a different personality will emerge and disappear, and they don't really know each other, like they're separate from each other. I think that's what you're asking. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm pretty sure that's
yeah.
right about that.
That's absolutely what I was saying, because I watched some of his interviews with other people like Michael Shermer, the atheist, for example, and it seemed like that's what he was talking about. Now, I don't see how that's consistent with Christianity, that says we have our own consciousness, our own identity through time and even after death. So I think what he does is undercut naturalism or materialism, atheism, but I don't think it's for that reason. It's the best viewpoint of a Christian understanding of the dualistic aspect of body and soul, or body and mind.
Well, I wanted to add on that because my understanding, okay, is that all we can know about the general resurrection at the end of time is Jesus' resurrection. And it is the witness of Scripture that Jesus was resurrected in a physical body. So I think that that's how idealism continues to work in the eschatology, because we will still have our body, so that consciousness will still be localized.
Mm-hmm. And there will be a distinction still, even within idealism, where you have mental representations of a particular subject versus sort of the objective representations of God himself, of like basically all of reality is being thought up by God. and then we
Right,
might have
exactly.
misconceptions about what God is thinking, and so we'll have, I don't know, some sort of delusion or illusion of some type. We'll have a hallucination, and that would be a sort of disconnect between what we the impressions that we have in our own subjective mind versus what is God is sort of subjectively creating with his mind. And so to say that Jesus became incarnate would be to say that Jesus wasn't just sort of like these sense impressions in each particular subject's mind, but rather in God's mind, he like made himself a sort of, or thought himself up a physical body that was there in objectively in the sort of like idealist sense of objectively,
Right,
and
right.
then also was resurrected in that same sort
Well,
of sense, and not just in a sort of
Like
illusory.
in Christian, you just jigger with his phenomenology a little, and you have perfectly
Yeah.
good Christian theology. You know, God in the beginning mind, which would be God, and he'd probably be okay with that, in the beginning mind. And we're all emanations of a universal consciousness. So we call it God, and then God thinks Jesus Christ and you and me into existence. And we all have our independent, separate consciousnesses that are independent of God, but they're all part of his omni God. So it can
yep.
easily, it's a little bit different than Christianity, but part of why I latched onto it is because he was trying to base it on empiricism, and he's got some evidence for his empirical side, the postulate, which I think is really interesting and compelling, like the fact that you take LSD and it's slowing down your brain rather than revving it up. And
Mhm.
there's interesting things that he talks about that I think are pretty compelling pieces of evidence. And I was just like, well, if you could bring somebody to universal mind, universal mind, God, tomato, tomato, what's the difference? That like,
Mhm.
and then he
I,
kind of was okay with my saying it that way, which I was surprised by.
the reason why I think Aristotelianism has a better approach is because it seems to lead to pantheism if we don't stipulate these qualifications. But as for the resurrection, it seems that if you have an understanding of the physical body, um, as being distinct from who we are, but they need to be in union for for there to be a personhood, so that the hypostatic um, uh, not hypostatic, it just left my mind. um, I'm sorry, I forgot what I was trying to say. That the hylomorphic viewpoint, it seems to account for a fully a more accurate representation of what it means to be a Christian. But
Mm.
that's my
I mean,
viewpoint.
yeah,
It just
it could be. It's That's why probably dry apologist isn't really all that into it, because he probably thinks it's not that compatible. I'm coming from it from the point of view as this is an atheist agnostic, not this is a great representation of
okay.
Christianity. I'm like, this is a
Okay,
really. Do you see what I mean? What?
Yeah,
Did I cut up?
sort of like
yeah,
bridging the gap between.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not
Now,
saying that this
if that
is great Christian theology and you should follow him.
Right.
I'm saying this is really interesting and compelling for an
okay.
atheist agnostic. This is close to our squad.
Okay. Well, if you're interpreting as like bridging the gap or showing signposts that just utterly refute materialism, I think we're on the same page there, because I think there are so many things that refute materialism. And John, I wanted to go to you and ask you about panpsychism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Fezer gives this argument for the intelligibility of reasons, for sufficient reasons, the principle of sufficient reason. There must be an intelligibility all the way down. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that intelligibility, then if somewhere in the link, in the chain, you have a link that's just merely a brute fact, well, you're left without an explanation. Is that what you're talking about with panpsychism, that it has a built-in intelligibility within it?
Yeah. So a lot of the reasons why people are inclined towards panpsychism is
Okay.
the sort of there's not going to, like, whenever somebody asks, like, okay, why is this thing conscious? There's going to be some sort of like answer there, or like, why is it the case that a certain arrangement of matter in a sort of brain-like structure is conscious, when you could have some other arrangement of matter that's just very close to a brain-like structure, but like just barely different, and then that thing isn't conscious. So what panpsychism does is it's going to say that it's just going to be necessary that for anything that exists, there's going to be something it's like to be that thing. And so there's not going to be like some other world in which something that exists, let's say myself, let's say, so there's not going to be some other world in which I don't exist, or I exist, but I'm not conscious at all. And for anything else that might exist, because like the question can be asked, like, okay, why is it that human beings are conscious, but I don't know, dogs aren't conscious? Or why is it that dogs are conscious, but grasshoppers aren't conscious? Or why is it that grasshoppers are conscious, but single-celled organisms aren't conscious? Or why is it that single-celled organisms are conscious,
Okay.
but electrons aren't conscious? So it's basically, panpsychists will just sort of recognize that, like, okay, we can't have this sort of arbitrary distinction between single-celled organisms and, I don't know, crickets, something like that. So like, well, everything is just going to be conscious. And like, there's a sense in which if you think about it where like consciousness is added on to everything, it would be like inflationary. But rather, that's not exactly how like panpsychists think of it. They think that when we're looking at things that exist, we're looking at conscious subjects, but we're looking at it from the outside. So like when I look at you, I'm looking at a conscious subject, but I can't like recognize your consciousness just by like looking at the pixels on my screen, or even if I was there with you in person, I couldn't like find your inside your brain where consciousness was or anything like that. It's just that anytime we look at something that exists, it's going to be a conscious subject somewhere in that thing that we're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. So that's very similar to what Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas refer to as final causation. That there's a goal directedness of both animate and inanimate objects. So if that's what you're talking about, that there must be an intelligibility to the universe to have final causation. To explain science, for example, there must be some intelligibility. Well, I would say I agree with you, but I would say panpsychism is would be like a low level representation of the fuller and broader scope of what Aristotelianism is. But I would say panpsychism clearly defeats materialism, because there are things, what we see in lived life and in perception, that have the capacities for certain things, for life, or or not, that have the capacities for doing certain things. So I think that's very close to what Aristotle and Aquinas meant by final causation. And by the way, the atheist or the materialist, seems the reason why I bring up common sense so much, the common sense in the Thomas Reid fashion, is it's the things we take for granted in our everyday life. But what holds common sense together is the Aristotelian natures to things, that things do have natures and causal dispositions or patterns that they exhibit in the material world. So I think panpsychism is, it's very close to that final causation of Aristotle and Aquinas. Correct? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ronald.
Oh, Ron.
I'm a little more hard on to idealism and Christianity than Craig probably is. I actually lean very hard into it, because for one quick example, you have like Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3. By faith we understand that the universe was formed by God's command, so that what is seen was made out of what was not visible. And you've got multiple places like that. I think it is the witness of Scripture that the spiritual or the unseen realm, so to speak, is actually more real than what we perceive as reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just don't
And
talk
our
like that all
reality,
the time.
yeah, our reality is a reflection of the spiritual realm or the unseen realm. Not quite. I wouldn't go so far as to say a hologram. I would say that our reality actually exists. It's just that it's a reflection of the spiritual realm that is like what C.S. Lewis briefly said is all things that are created from higher things, right? Not from lower things. And so we're created in God's image, and God is the ultimate consciousness, or the one mind, or whatever, however you want to put that. And we are like that. And I really lean hard into idealism because it rejects hard dualism, which I think the witness of Scripture and Orthodox Christianity says it does as well, because you fall easily into Gnosticism. But it also integrates the spiritual and the conscious into the material.
Well, there's a whole wide range of what makes up a person, and I think any philosophy, Craig, and I want you to say something about this because I think it's important. Any philosophy that doesn't take into consideration our spiritual, desires and wants and everything, is simply going to be, found lacking. I think theism does that. But Craig, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, I totally agree with what Ron just said. One of the things that you got to keep in mind when you're listening to the stuff I say on my channel is that I'm deliberately avoiding spiritual language the way I actually embody or live it in my actual life. Like, I believe a lot of different things. What I'm doing with philosophy and the things I'm talking about on my channel is trying to integrate it and bring it down to the level where, like, secular people and people who are totally on a different page can listen and get a hold of it. So I agree with what Ron just said, and I think you could make a case like, we're in Christianity, we're created in the image of God, so we're a manifestation of God's consciousness, and then we are trying to become Christ-like on this earth, and we have the blood of Jesus, which is cleansing us of the separation of our fallen nature, and then in the end, when we reconcile to God through His sacrifice on the cross, it is us in union with the perfection of God or God's consciousness. I could easily tweak everything that I think so that it's totally a lot more Christian. I just don't do it on my channel. I'm kind of avoiding it.
You do it to bridge that gap.
Yeah, because I'm trying to, like when I first heard him, I was thinking of it in Christian terms, but I try to talk about only in secular terms.
Well, I think the thing that we see with like Bernardo Castro and say Douglas Murray and others who have, and Tom Holland even, who have been sympathetic towards Christianity recently. And the challenge that they've thrown, the gauntlet that they've thrown down to Christians is, give me something real, right? And what I'm always I'm so concerned about, because what I've seen in the Bible and I've experienced with God is that, and what we so poorly articulate so often, is that Christianity, God, Jesus, the Bible, actually explain reality. And I think that's what they're wanting. That's what people are wanting from Christians right now, because things are so crazy that they're wanting, like Douglas Murray wants to be a Christian, but he wants to be intellectually honest.
Believe what we say and know that it corresponds to reality, the reality that he can go into his textbook and go, yes, this corresponds to reality. like concrete reality. They don't want us to just say, you know, Jesus loves you so much and just, you know, just feel him in your heart. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly
And-
what they're asking for us to like bridge the gap between the quote unquote real world and the spiritual reality that some of us
Yeah.
think we walk in.
And to be clear,
Yeah.
I trend towards the east myself. You know, I'm not so much a Western Christian. I kind of go more eastward.
I think John Buck does too. Haven't you been reading like?
He's
I
Western.
did.
He's Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I was attending an Eastern Orthodox church for 2 years before I finally crossed the Tiber.
Well, weren't you reading like Eastern mystics too, or am I?
Yeah, I was reading some. In fact, I still like have a fond. There's definitely the East has put a greater emphasis on the spiritual growth that happens for the Christian. That the West is sort of lost and definitely needs to sort of like take that up again from our Eastern brethren. But there's other elements that I became Catholic instead of Orthodox, which is not part of this discussion. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm not completely Orthodox because I think they can easily fall too hard into Platonism and a Platonic dualism. But I'm not entirely Western either because I think they're too purely intellectual and
Gotcha.
Augustinian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha. All right, so I think honestly, atheist, our lone audience member. Actually, we might have a couple more. He was wanting a show. Like he was told that we were going to provide the death of materialism, and so far we've only sort of laid out various like worldviews, like maybe like what idealism is and how it accounts for certain things. But like if we're supposed to like really be killing materialism, we should probably like provide arguments of some sort for why there is something over and above the material world. Yeah,
we can't kill materialism because it's already dead. I already gave two arguments for that. The misplaced concreteness, that how the reduction of of things in lived life, like. And Craig has talked about this elsewhere, of qualia, just, it's simply unaccounted for, and, in common sense. There's no person that claims to be a materialist that lives that way, that believes that our perceptions are simply translatable into in an electromagnetic spectrum. There's not one alive. And plus, that they all think that that what they do is intelligible and that it has a sufficient explanation. Not one of them stops with a brute fact or lives that way. It's only conspicuously that when it becomes the brute fact only conspicuously pertains to the beginning of the universe or to the nature of the universe. So Thomas Reed also chastised David Hume and people and John Locke, and he says, if you deny causation, that's like a hobby horse when a person can take home with him. But just in case you bring that view that causation isn't real, just in case you believe that, if you take it to the marketplace of ideas, a panel will quickly confiscate your estates and never leave you alone with that belief again. So we all live according to fundamental metaphysical principles, like the law of causation, that non-being being can't arise from non-being, and a host of others. The law of proportionate causality, that the effect cannot be greater than the cause, or whatever's in the effect must in some way be in the cause. We all live according to these, and throughout history, the last time I looked, it wasn't naturalism or materialism or atheism that built Western society. It was it was the Catholic Church. I would simply ask our atheist listeners to read something like How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, or I could go to Rodney Stark's book, The Triumph of Faith, or there's a number of other books. How the West Won, the neglected story of modernity. There's such a resurgence of how Christianity, there's just a plethora of reasons not to be a materialist today, not least that of reducing things like qualia and other facets of reality. You reduce those to chemical and physical processes, you're living in a world that never has existed, and no person has ever lived that way. So, I'm not a materialist for good reasons.
Well,
sorry, I spoke a little long.
Well, as far as destroying materialism, you can't have just materialism, because, like Pine Creek Doug said the other day when he was arguing with Chris, he said, well, I've been in a lab and I've done a chemistry experiment and I've seen the material, the empirical evidence. Okay, but you had to see it. You can't separate the observer from the experiment. There's no way to do that.
Right, like there's a sense in which
conscious.
Pine Creek might be assuming a sort of naive realism that like he's experiencing the physical thing as it actually is, and not just like having this sort of observation of a thing. Okay, yeah.
But if you're a strict materialist, then how can you trust your senses of the evolved brain? I mean, you can't separate consciousness from the measurement.
Yeah,
right.
That's a very real problem for science. And then you've got the hard problem of consciousness from the materialist side. And you've got the fact that the brain actually interacts with the physical brain actually interacts with the mind to some degree from the hard dualist side. And that's why I'm in favor of this idealism as explained by Bernardo Castro. The idea of the brain as a filter, not as the origin of your consciousness. Because your brain doesn't correspond one-to-one with your internal experience. Like Craig said, under hallucinogens, under materialism, you would absolutely expect your brain to just be firing off because you're having hallucinations, things that aren't there.
Right.
But your brain's not firing. Go ahead.
What it empirically seems like is actually your brain is slowing down and the filters are being removed. So you're starting to see and hear things that are actually available to you, you just normally don't see and hear. Like one of the things that they talked about in the late 60s when people were taking LSD was they could actually see music. And that was a common thing. And music is vibrations in the air. There's probably no good reason why you can't see it, except that a lot of this stuff in the atmosphere, there are sounds now that we can't hear, and there are visual things that we can't see because part of what our brain is doing. And there's another guy who calls himself a materialist, Anil Seth, who's actually, a lot of the stuff he says overlaps with the Donald Hoffman stuff. And these are basically facts. Our brain is interpreting reality to a large degree, guessing at the reality that's out there based on other experiences. It's not a one-to-one correspondence with the material world. So that alone makes materialism struggle. And that's why I went to quantum mechanics, because the mathematics is so precise at the quantum level that it actually underscores that really well. So there's no arguing.
Well, I don't think you even have to go to the quantum level, because you can just say, well, what better explains the law-like structure of the universe, of the observable universe? Naturalism or theism. Aristotle said, if the art of shipbuilding was in the wood, the physical constituents, then we would have ships by nature. That the very fact that there are that there is the ability, or there's a law-like structure of the physical universe that we can get to the moon and back, shows that there is not a chaotic universe. There is some pattern that mathematics somehow attaches to in a way we can know about, that we live our lives by. So this is explained under theism and naturalism or materialism simply lacks that explanatorial, satisfactory answer.
John,
All right.
what say you?
All right. So I don't know. I'm still somebody that's very much open to multiple different theories of mind out there. I'm not like hard set in my panpsychism. I'm sort of just trying it out for size right now. So far, I like it. Because I was previous to this, like I still favor idealism in certain respects because it definitely has mental causation to it. It's a little bit easier to comprehend than a sort of dualist theory where you have to think about like, well, how is it that something immaterial can interact with something material or something like that? That's a general sort of like concern for a strong dualism. But I like panpsychism both for the fact that, well, if my sort of version of panpsychism is where like, at least what sort of makes sense to me is that there are mental subjects, all there are mental subjects, and some of these mental subjects have physical properties. So I'll accept a sort of like epiphenomenalism of physicalism, because it's not the physical objects or the physicalness of an object that causes it to do things, but it's the mental aspect of the object that causes
Right. There's a relationship between your brain and the object that partially accounts for some of its manifestation.
Well, yeah. So I would
but
say
that's a fact, though. That's the thing that you got to stress. That's a fact, and that fact defeats materialism because there is more going on than just the intrinsic properties of a thing in front of you. There's how it presents itself in consciousness. That's two separate things. That fact is what annihilates materialism. That's all I was saying. That's I didn't argue it.
No, it's fine.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say when we perceive reality, this is Immanuel Kant. When we perceive reality, we don't just perceive the physical world. We perceive it through a categorical framework of these ideals and these transcendentals, these categories of the pure intuition. Now, I'm not a follower of Kant, but I believe he has a number of things that shows that we perceive things. It's because of who we are. We perceive things in a certain way. Yeah.
Would you guys like? Oh no, go ahead, Ron.
I'm a big fan of symbolism. Okay. And I think it's foundational to anything because language is symbol. It is both is the thing and not the thing, right? It represents the thing, but it isn't the thing itself. And I think symbolism is important in this because we have to filter reality. We can't just have every single fact of everything around us flood into our mind and actually function. We have to filter reality. We have perception and that which is important, a hierarchy of what's most important. And I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, symbolism is definitely connected to consciousness because symbols sort of point to something besides themselves.
Yeah. Well, also, I want to really grill John Buck on panpsychism. We need to do that for 40 minutes. That's a joke. That's a joke.
Why? Because of him getting grilled on. What were you getting grilled on exactly? That was like an hour, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, Pine Creek jumped on JB's stream to bully me on my Catholicism. Actually, it wasn't really much on Catholicism, just sort of
on the problem of Pine Creek's version of the problem of evil. For a straight hour, though, was it?
He wasn't bullying me. I was just saying that cheekily. It was a fun time. I actually enjoyed it.
He was kind of bullying you. I mean, it's not bullying, but it's like he asked all the questions, and you have to do all the answers, and it doesn't get reversed. It's not like you go, exactly. Well, explain this.
Plus, there's 4 other non-theists in the call
and
as
they
well,
were all ganging up on you.
They were all chipping in. But I was
and then
5. It was fun.
Then 5 people in the chat.
Right. Also telling you that you're wrong, John. You're wrong.
Oh yeah, that's true.
the
I was
atheist.
like talking about hell, and all
Sorry.
the Christian theists in the chat were like, "No, hell is obviously fake." It's like, why would all loving God send people to hell and all these other things? So yeah, I was
That's the
getting it from
atheist.
all sides.
Yeah, you were totally getting it from all sides.
I'm a
That's-
You were holding
persecuted
your own,
Christian.
John. You were the persecuted church. That's exactly what happened.
No, but that's
All right.
the atheist mob mentality. I want to bring up something. What you were talking about, how the mind interacts with the body and how the body interacts with the mind, John.
Mhm.
With panpsychism, that's called the interaction problem, and I'm sure you know that. But and others have brought this up. They say that's a problem for dualism, but I don't think it's a problem for Aristotelianism, because the mind and body are intertwined, interwoven, and they both have potentials and causal dispositions to affect one another. So brain states can have an effect on the mind, and the mind can have an effect on physical states. G.E. Moore, he gave an argument for this in his short work. I believe it's called in defense of common sense. G.E. Moore also argued for common sense principles, and he said, "I can give an argument for free will." And he goes ahead and he lifts his left hand and said, "See, I just lifted my left hand." And then he goes ahead and lifts his right hand and says, "See, I lifted my right hand." But this interaction problem is, I think, directly and decisively answered by an Aristotelian approach that has the mind and body intertwined in a complete full person, is when they're both combined. So I think that on an Aristotelian position, the resurrection makes the physical resurrection makes the most sense out of any position.
Mm-hmm. And just to correct you, I think G.E. Moore was using that argument as a proof of the external world. That, like, it's so abundantly clear to me that here's a hand, and this hand is part of the external world. And so this is like his proof, sort of like reversing the argument. But there's a similar philosopher, John Searle, that makes a sort of argument for free will, similar to that, where like, well, I have this belief that I can raise my hand, and like there, lo and behold, my hand raises, and and he was using that as a sort of.
Yeah, and that's I'm sorry, it was about the external world what G.E. Moore was doing, but that and John Searle, those are two philosophers who were arguing on the principles of common sense, those first principles of common sense, those metaphysical principles that we all take for granted in everyday life. Now, that's all I was going to say.
Yeah.
Did you hear there's an Anil Seth, he's like the new consciousness guy. They do an experiment where they put you can't see your right arm. They put a block up, and then they put a thing that looks exactly like where your arm would be if it were attached to your body. Mm-hmm. So your brain thinks it's your arm. Like your brain corrects and guesses based off of interpretation, not off of actuality. So they actually literally prove this. You start touching the person, tickling like their finger or something, and you're not tickling their actual arm. You're tickling the fake arm. But the person literally experiences it. Literally is like, oh my God. It's like, it's totally insane. And like what he's talking about, the same thing that Donald Hoffman shows you, where he puts up colors and you see them as 3D. Obviously, they're not 3D. But that's what your brain is interpreting it as. It's making a guess at reality. See, that's the part that can't be accounted for.
I'll have to look into those experiments later. Those sound pretty wild.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He's the new guy in town. They were talking about some conscious. He's a materialist, which is really weird. He was on with not John Steingrad. He was on with Philip Goff's channel.
Oh, cool. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm a fan of Goff. All right, so Josh, when like sort of rounding up these group of Twitter people. He said to bring our arguments against materialism. And so, like, I was trying to think of, like, what is an actual argument? Like, why do I think that materialism is false? And, like, yeah, go ahead.
I want to, I think we've alluded to a number of arguments or reasons, but Craig, you brought up one from qualia. You said that, I believe, and this wasn't a while back. You said the color yellow. The color yellow disproves materialism or shows.
Right. If you're looking at the boogie board in your room, okay, of the material, I started elaborating on this a lot, but there's the object-based ontology to the boogie board, which is what it is comprised of materially. That's consistent with materialism. But then materialism can't answer what color is the boogie board, because that requires a visual experience of the board in consciousness. There are things that materialism is insufficient to answer by itself, because the object-based ontology, the material properties of something by itself, are not enough to tell, don't give you enough information. And then why I jumped to quantum mechanics is because this is proven at the quantum level, because there are three attributes that quantum mechanics teaches about the nature of reality, one of which is consistent with materialism, that it's granular, indeterminate, and relational. Indeterminate and relational is fact-based. That's what quantum mechanics teaches about the nature of reality, and it annihilates materialism as basically a possibility. It's an outmoded way of looking at the world as just stuff. It was an arbitrary separation of mind and matter. So you have the boogie board. What color is it? In order for you even to know what color something is, you have to have a visual experience of it in consciousness. It's a meaningless question without a conscious experience of the boogie board, right? I mean, that was the argument you're talking about. I don't know if I was just clear right then.
I think that's definitely a good argument against, like, eliminative materialism. Like, in order to even, like, talk about consciousness, we're going to have to accept the fact that, there is this sort of experience of the color yellow that is some
in consciousness.
feature
You
to
try
reality.
explaining it to a blind man. Well, it's really yellow. What do you mean? Well, it's different than red. How's it different? It's more yellow than red would be. You couldn't even do it. You couldn't even come close.
Yeah, there are still going to be physicalists, though, that will think that, there is the color yellow that the brain produces for us. The experience of the color yellow is something that the brain produces for us. And I think that can, like, either the physicalist will say that experience of the color yellow is sort of identical to some certain brain state or something like that, or maybe it's some sort of emergent property from the brain, that it's distinct from the brain itself. But it's still something that is
but
sort
even
of causally
as an emergent property,
dependent
even if you give the materialists their entire due, there's no supernatural, not a dual. That's why I don't talk about dualism on any of stuff, because if you prove that, it's just as hard to prove God. You give them entirely their due. It's just material stuff. There's still material and the phenomena of material, and there's a separation there which makes materialism untenable. And that separation is really important at the quantum level, because it's actually really profoundly strong. So there's a discrepancy between what an object actually is and perceptions about it, where it is, a lot of different things. So, yeah.
Well, and if it was just materialism, you would be able to experiment and find the color yellow.
Right. And there's yellow. That was just the most obvious one I latched onto. There's a lot of them like that.
Yeah. And you can't say, well, this pigment that we've scraped off of here is yellow. That's not the perception of the thing itself. That's symbolism. That's probably where I was trying to go with that. Is we can't actually fully access full reality. We access reality filtered because we have to.
And what about a concert? You can't strip a concert down to just its material properties. That doesn't make any sense. You have to put on the headphones and actually listen to it in order to even understand what's being discussed. And that eliminates eliminative materialism, because there's an experience there that needs to be accounted for.
And then you have, like, mathematics, which does have strong explanatory power of reality. But also, you've got, with mathematics, you've got music, which is mathematics.
Yeah.
And it takes you to a transcendent experience. It takes you somewhere you can't travel. But
This is why
go ahead.
This is why I think theism is on a better explanatory. It's a better explanatory view than materialism, because it explains a whole wide range of phenomena, not just the physical, the constituents of the ship, as in Aristotle's phraseology, his analogy, but it also explains the final cause. Why was the ship built, or the purpose, the form in the shipbuilder's mind. It explains different facets of reality: the physical, the mental, the spiritual, just a whole wide range. This whole web of viewpoints. It explains music, art, the humanities, without reducing them to a mere physical constituent.
Well, yeah, but you can't. There's a point where the reduction
Yeah.
becomes impossible, because there's something.
Well, it becomes absurd.
Right.
It becomes absurd.
Even if you don't put God in there.
That's what I was trying to. Yeah. And that's my main argument. That's Thomas Reid's main argument, from which I borrow. Whenever I give my talks, that's what I mean by common sense. Now, of course, he goes into it way more than that, and then perception. He shows different things about perception and our sensory abilities and how we understand physical phenomena. It must be understood through a lens of metaphysical categories of the understanding. But look, you can't even express materialism in an intelligible way without transcending the mere physical or the mere material.
That's the key. That's the key. Is there
Yeah.
always comes a part where you're either appealing to God, which you keep saying theism, or appealing to mystery. But either way, there's still material and the phenomena of material. You can't get away from it. The concert can't be reduced to just the physical properties of the stuff. You have to actually experience it in order to even understand what's being talked about. The visual painting can't be reduced to just the chemical properties. It's irrelevant. Somebody cares, but it's the visual experience that's important.
And in a painting or in a piece of art, when you look at it, it's not just the material of the ink or
Right.
of the brush strokes. It can teach us different things, and also teach us different things through time. You wouldn't expect that on a purely material understanding of reality. It's just that idealism, and I think theism particularly, makes a whole wide range of the explanatory richness, not just the explanatorial thoroughness of theism, but the explanatory richness of the details of lived life, of what a painting is, what it says to you, what a piece of art or music, what it says, the spiritual. I think there's so many reasons why materialism is simply false.
So I think honestly, atheist is still unimpressed with our argument so far. So if you'll humor me for like 3 minutes, I actually prepared a slide for an argument that when thinking about it, like why do I think that physicalism is false?
Cool.
This is the one that I'm actually most confident in, I guess. I don't know. There's several reasons. But like if I were to try to make a strong case, this is the one I'd point to. And like understanding physicalism as a position that mental reality is either identical to or produced by some sort of physical arrangement of atoms or whatever we want to sort of use to sort of talk about what a physical brain structure is or something like that. So my case is, I guess, sort of like building off of sort of like Sorites paradoxes. I don't know if you guys are familiar, where it's also known as the heap paradox, where like how many grains of sand do you add to other grains of sand in order to get to a heap? I actually did share a slide. So Josh, if you click on that, it should be able to present it to everyone.
Shoot, I'm like the
You
worst
can
at
share
technology.
screen
World.
on.
On StreamYard, yeah.
Oh, but you have to have a.
It would just
laptop,
be
right?
like how you like brought people into the group chat or brought them
Okay.
into the show.
So I go to settings.
I don't, it would be in
general.
Actually, I have it in stream from StreamYard. I think it should be just so like where you would bring people in or out of the room. It should be showing up down there, I think.
Well, I'm on my phone
Okay.
because my computer crashed
Okay.
last time I streamed.
Well, if we can't share it, that's fine. I can just read it off to you. It's a simple argument.
Yeah, just
Okay,
go through
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, that's fine. Okay, so yeah, so understanding physicalism as a position that either mental reality is identical to or produced by physical reality. That's like a basic enough sort of definition of physicalism. All right, so premise one. If physicalism were true, then some minuscule change would account for whether something is or isn't conscious. All right, so I'll defend that sort of basically, where when we're talking about something that is conscious, we're going to be talking about some sort of composite object out of physical reality. And then there's going to be some point where physical reality can be described as being unconscious or being described as being conscious. And there's going to be some sort of physical change that makes that difference. Now, I'm just like thinking about like, okay, what would be the thing that makes that difference? Because like, okay, we're going to accept that, okay, the human brain, that's some physical reality that's conscious. But a rock, that's going to be some physical reality that isn't conscious. So there's going to be some sort of like transition between being like a rock and being like a brain, to where there's going to be some minute difference between the two, and one of them is going to be conscious in some sort of sense, even if it's the most basic of consciousnesses, of like just having a sort of black awareness, that there's a black sense of awareness that's just sort of occurring. And then the other one, and that's going to be a conscious reality. And then there's going to be not even that. There's no consciousness there. There's no sense of blackness or anything like that. And if we were to like look at the physical differences between these two things, there could be a very tiny, minute just difference between the two, where you have maybe one extra atom, and that suddenly it's conscious. You have some sort of sense of awareness to whatever this thing that we're creating here, whether it's maybe like a fetus. Like let's say in the stages of development for a human being, the physicalist is going to say, oh, a fetus isn't conscious, but a newborn baby certainly is. And there's going to be some sort of like minute change that occurs within the fetus, that suddenly, oh, this fetus has some sort of sense of awareness here. And I'm just pointing out that, like, okay, there's going to be this, okay, and then premise two, okay, but some minuscule change cannot account for whether something is or isn't conscious. This is a sort of like intuition I have that I don't know if it'll be shared by many people, but at least it seems to me quite clearly that like some like movement of an atom, like 1 nanometer to the right versus 1 nanometer to the left, does not seem like a sufficient account of like why something is conscious or how something is conscious. And that's going to be like basically at like, if we were to like slide the scale between what is and isn't conscious, it's going to be some tiny minuscule sort of difference between the one and the other, that I just don't find plausible. And then, so from there, physicalism must be false. So I'll read it out again just for everyone, and then we can sort of discuss it. If physicalism were true, then some minuscule change would account for whether something is or isn't conscious. Then premise two, but some minuscule change cannot account for whether something is or isn't conscious. So physicalism must be false. All right, so there's this sort of argument. Philip Goff, who's a panpsychist, he's defended this in a 2013 paper, and I think probably in his podcast as well, but I actually learned about it through Emerson Green. Uh,
Can you read premise 1 again?
yeah, if physicalism were true, then some minuscule change would account for whether something is or isn't conscious. So, like, whether, like, honestly, atheists brought up in the chat, like, maybe it's the presence of an electrical charge or not. So, like, an electrical charge, that's going to be composed of electrons. So, like, there's going to be some amount of electrical charge that makes the difference between a conscious entity and an unconscious entity. And so if you remove one electron from that charge, suddenly it's an unconscious entity, even though there was this other amount of electricity sort of surging through it. And that seems to me like very implausible, that like the one difference in electron in some sort of charge, or like there's going to be a variety of different ways that a physicalist is going to sort of describe consciousness, whether it's an arrangement of neural cells that are active or something like that, or maybe it's a number of cells in the brain that makes a thing conscious. So like whatever the physicalist is sort of presenting as an argument for what makes something conscious or not, you can just like start picking away at that, like these tiny little differences, and there's going to be some point where that thing that was conscious, it's no longer conscious. And so you can just point out the sort of ludicrousness of like, okay, we have this unconscious thing now, and then we add that like tiny little thing, and even if it's like an arrangement or a structure of some type, then that structure, if it's divergent just the smallest amount, that's going to mean, or at least at some point in this sort of scale, the smallest amount is going to be the difference between a conscious reality and an unconscious reality. And just to clarify, by consciousness, I'm not meaning like a heightened sense of consciousness of like being able to rationally sort of come to decisions and things like this. I'm talking about the smallest sort of sense of consciousness that's there. And even then that's going to be significant, that like, okay, there can be something that has nothing that it's like to be that thing. Like it, some arrangement of atoms. There's nothing it's like to be that arrangement of atoms. But you add one more atom, boom, now there's something it's like to be that arrangement of atoms. And that just seems like pretty implausible to me.
Implausible. Yeah. I think I'm following what you're saying. So is the intuition is that you're trying to underscore that the irreducibility, because it's so astonishingly complex that it couldn't possibly be accounted for by like one extra little, here a charge is added and now you have consciousness, two physical properties. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm just saying that like the movement of an atom 1 nanometer to the side or not, or like the addition of like one atom.
In other words,
or
if
something like that.
was true,
That's going to be irrelevant to consciousness.
There would be one step. You could just take one step away, and all of a sudden consciousness is gone. So you could just add one tiny little thing to like an unconscious thing and have consciousness, and there's no way on earth that's possible. So
and it's not like the thing that you're adding. It's not like the thing that you're adding is a soul to the thing, because then at least that makes some sense. But it's just going to be another unconscious thing that you're adding to it.
Because you'd be adding a tiny little physical thing that all of a sudden turns on all the lights, and now it's a conscious entity. And there's it's actually an excellent argument, because it's totally underscoring the irreducibility aspect of physicalism. I mean, totally underscores it. There's no little tiny thing you could add. You know, it's like if you add water, if you add like, you know, something to water, now you have like a little drop to water, now you have lemonade. There's nothing like that that you could put to the something's unconscious and you have this tiny little thing, now it's conscious. You're underscoring the irreducibility of the physical properties. Yeah, I think it's a good argument. I like it.
Well,
I think it's true. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you can't reduce consciousness to explain it. I mean, materialism has been the presupposition for science for at least a century. And for at least 50 years, they've been working hard, thoroughly on artificial intelligence under the presupposition of material physicalism. And they've got nowhere. Not even close. And they don't know.
Castro says they'll never get there. That's when he became.
They won't.
That's when he first realized the hard problem of consciousness, because he was working on artificial intelligence. Go ahead.
Well, and so I need a definition. I actually need a definition of an explanatory definition from physicalism, materialism for consciousness. They haven't got one.
Right. So honestly, Atheist was
Well,
asking me a question in the chat. Like, do I believe that doctors are mystified by the physical differences between conscious and unconscious people?
No, but
No, I
an
don't.
unconscious person is a conscious agent.
Yeah, yeah,
They're just asleep.
yeah.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
not.
even close.
Yeah, like even if you think like it's not the fact that like oh when I give you ether or whatever it is that
Now you're
they probably don't
unconscious.
they probably don't give out ether anymore. That like
you
suddenly
say
you're
The
now
cool,
no
the cool
longer a
doctors
conscious
still do.
entity.
The cool doctors still give out ether.
Maybe
Michael
Craig's doctor
Jackson's
does.
doctor does because pay him enough, he'll give you whatever you want.
well, this is pertaining to your argument, and then what you just said, Craig. Because the person is unconscious, because he is asleep. That doesn't mean he's not a person, and it's because he has the potential, the real potential or capacity to function as a person. That means he has intrinsic worth, as opposed to just a clump of clay or a bundle of cells. It's the potential, the final causality, kind of like of an acorn always producing into an oak tree, or the pregnancy of a woman is not just a clump of cells, but it has the potential, the real potential, not the metaphysical, logical potential, the real potential, the directedness of the natural development of producing a human being. So I think that even if we can't pinpoint consciousness, we can show through potentiality to actuality, the real capacity, the real final cause of something, that it has intrinsic worth, and thus argue against abortion or something, even though we can't pinpoint consciousness. So I think I think your argument is misdirected because it tries to find consciousness, or says because we can't find consciousness, physicalism is false, and how that's a bad argument. I think you should look at it in Aristotelian terms.
Right. So it's not like the fact that we can't find consciousness that proves that physicalism is false. That's not what the argument's making. Because like
No, I think he meant to the guy who was commenting to you.
Oh, okay.
He's not talking about you.
Okay.
I was thinking that originally too. So wait, that doesn't make sense. But he's
I got
talking
it.
to the guy because
Yeah.
it's still
Right,
a conscious. Someone who's asleep or has become unconscious is still a conscious agent. They're
Yeah.
just asleep or unconscious. The word is confusing, but
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
you're
still gonna-
saying, the reason why your
Just
argument is
the
actually
term.
really strong is that it is undercutting the irreducibility of consciousness. When something becomes a conscious agent, seems irreducible to strictly physical properties, and what you're doing is just reversing it, so that like here are the physical properties that are building a conscious agent. Which one do you add that turns it into, like if they were building a computer from AI, what's the thing they're going to add to make it go, oh, I can listen to this painting. I mean, I can listen to this song now. Nothing. That's why, it's almost an argument for dualism, because it really underscores the mystery of it all. I think it's a really good argument.
Thanks.
Well, I think
Yeah, go
honest-
ahead, Ron.
I think also the thing is, whenever you talk about like hallucinogenic experiences actually show a less active brain, well, then a physicalist will say, well, there's just something going on there we can't detect, and that's like magic and monkey dust. I mean, okay, let's just make shit up. I mean, but, sorry about my language, but I mean, that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's make stuff up. But
Yeah.
also, I mean, AI is very strong in debunking physicalism because, and it's also, I think, well, if you go to VR, like some people get sick when they're in virtual reality. I don't like it myself. I feel very odd in virtual reality, what little I've done. And it's because consciousness actually has to be embodied. And John Vervaeke talks about the sum, is it can't just be the brain or a mind. It has to be embodied and to be connected to reality. And that's why I think, like I myself, not real bad, but in virtual reality, I actually do not like it. I don't feel comfortable because I'm seeing and perceiving this stuff that's going on or this 3D object, but I have no connection to it at all.
Yeah, I think what you said resonates with what Thomas Reid talked about in his inquiry about how we have a natural disposition of causality because of our own bodies, because of perceiving our own way to move and stuff. So we learn about the world. We know that the world that there's causation in the world by reference to our own type of bodies. Now that was in reference to Hume, who said causation is just a bundle of perceptions, and we'll never know. But anything could be the cause of anything. And Reid says, no, we have a natural disposition to think that things have causes in the world because we ourselves can cause things in the world with our free will.
And if I could, real quick, something I've been meaning to mention is our perception of reality is not nothing. I mean, it often gets downgraded as though we're supposed to rise above our own perception, and only a high-brained person does so. It's only a low-brow person who actually appreciates their own perception. And this, I think you can really see this in determinist arguments, because it's like you may have a philosophical argument for determinism, but you don't live that way. You don't perceive your life determined.
Yeah. At all.
Yeah, it's like Craig.
You
It's like, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
It's like the solipsism argument. Yeah, but mere logic won't get you out of a paper bag. You have to deal with lived life, how it presents itself to you, and go from there, and try to understand reality through these, through our natural inclination. That's why when Ronald, when you brought up language and symbols, that's very powerful. Ludwig Wittgenstein talks about that. Before that, Thomas Reid and G.E. Moore, how an artificial language like English or French or Spanish, that they would have no meaning if there weren't first a natural language which united all of them in some way. You could refer to this as God guiding evolution, the evolutionary process, or God just minting us in His creation, where we're able to communicate, and communicate with abstract reasoning and so forth. So this native natural inclination of language, it's not merely symbolic, but it represents things in the real world. And, so the very fact of communication, I think, undercuts naturalism.
Well, the thing about symbolism, and it's kind of like myth, and it's like symbolism or myth is not just myth or just symbolism. I mean, it is the thing, and it isn't the thing. It's both at the same time. There is a dualism there, in that it is the thing and isn't the thing. But that's the way we perceive reality, I think. I mean, language is symbolism. Symbolism explains reality to us because it's like, what is a table? You can say you can give you all the parameters of a table or all the measurements of a table, but then you go to a tree stump that's turned down or been cut down, and you eat your lunch on the tree stump, suddenly it's a table. Or you sit on it and it's a chair.
Right.
Right. So honestly, Atheist in the chat, he actually was raising a good point that like there's still going to be some minute sort of difference between a person that is awake from a person that is like put out through anesthesia, and like if you wanted to look at the very like close like exactly what the minute details of that is, there might be some sort of difference between if they had that sort of like additional oxygen element there, then they might have remained awake. But if they don't have that oxygen element there, they might have went unconscious. And I think that's a good point. And maybe the argument should be clarified, like the difference between a conscious entity and a non-conscious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and a non-conscious entity. Because it's not like when I put somebody down through anesthesia that they become a different type of entity. They're the same type of entity.
No, that's why it doesn't make any difference. Consciousness is just the word is throwing them off. It's a conscious agent. What's the ingredient that you add that turns something into a conscious agent that isn't a conscious agent, not unconscious? He's confusing unconsciousness, which is a state of a conscious agent, but it's still a conscious agent. Right. So it's just a word that's throwing us.
Yeah, if you wanted to like make a stronger point, I guess you could say, okay, well, what's the difference between a human living body and a dead corpse? There's going to be some sort of like atomic difference there. Like if you remove enough atoms from a human living body, they're going to become a dead corpse. Like if you remove all their I don't know, or if like you happen to remove only the atoms surrounding their aorta or something like that, to the point that they're no longer like allowing to have blood.
It was stronger originally. It's actually a really strong argument. Where did you borrow it or did you create it?
No, I didn't create this. Like I said, I first heard about it from Emerson. He has this video, why physicalism is a bad account of consciousness, or like doesn't explain consciousness. I think what was the
he's going to talk about that on Zach's channel in like 2 days or something.
So if anyone wants to watch the video, it's called "Can Physicalism Explain Phenomenal Consciousness?" and that's on Emerson Green's YouTube channel. And it's a great video. It's like 30 minutes long, and it goes over several different arguments for why he thinks that physicalism is just not a sufficient account of consciousness, and why he's also a panpsychist. But he also gets that from Philip Goff, I'm pretty sure, is the main sort of proponent of this argument.
Yes. And then Philip Goff and John Steingart just had a conversation on this
a
couple of days ago. It was pretty good.
We've been discussing these subjects for an hour and 50
minutes. I was going to say.
I cannot believe it. We only have 3 more hours to go, guys. And
before we turn into a Nathan Ormond stream.
We got to catch up with digital gnosis.
Yeah, we're gonna keep presenting arguments for 24 hours straight, guys. This is amazing. No, do a telethon or something. Okay, well, how about everybody give some last words, and then we'll call it a night. Craig, do you what do you say? You've said a lot of things, said a lot of wonderful things. All of y'all have. What would you say for the last words, if you could say something to the materialist to try to get him to maybe broaden his mind?
Give it up. The game is over. Materialism is an outmoded way of perceiving reality, insufficient to explain the data. And if none argument here satisfies you, go look at physics. The 3 attributes of physics taught us about the nature of reality: granular, indeterminate, and relational. Indeterminate and relational knock materialism out as it's an outmoded way. Like, you could be forgiven for thinking, if it was 1908, everybody was a materialist and thinking that the world was a big clock. And then when quantum mechanics entered in the picture, you realized it was a lot more complex, and it just doesn't account for everything. So you got 2 things you're going to account to. And that's why, like John's argument, is God or mystery, one or the other. But you can't, it's not just a like simple clock and stuff, and it just doesn't work anymore. It's way more complicated than that. That's what I would say.
Okay, Ronald, do you have any? What would you say to the atheist or the materialist?
Repent.
You're muted.
Repent.
Oh,
This is Ron. I say repent. Give
Repent,
repent or you're going to hell.
Repent and fear hell. But no, no, that's not what I
Stop
would
touching
say.
your wiener at 3 o'clock in the morning.
It might be, yeah, yeah. No, but I don't care how highbrow and explanatory you get. You're not going to explain to the common person that physicalism is everything, because they're not going to understand it. They're not going to perceive it. And that's not nothing. That's important. Get out of your ivory towers and live life, people. Understand life and reality. Because you know that your experience is not reducible to just physical reality. You go to a rock concert, you go to or whatever music concert you enjoy. You go to a classical, you listen to Bach and Beethoven, and you're not thinking, well, that's 4/4 timing, and this is that and that. You are enjoying it. You are transcending your present reality and going somewhere, because that is what life actually is. And Sam Harris can go. I'm not going to say that.
Sam Harris's wife is a panpsychist.
You can go to
now.
church. That's where Sam Harris can go.
He can go to church.
He can go to church.
Go to church.
But Sam Harris is an avatar. He's a symbol of the high-minded idealism. Not idealism, because that's not what we're talking. What we're talking about, the high-minded ideals of the materialist, physicalist, atheist who thinks that your own perceived reality is nothing, and it's a matter of philosophy and thought, or philosophy and measurement. Nobody lives that way.
Right. Okay, so as for me, like, if I were to talk to a materialist, like, I don't know, I think in just, like, trying to come up with what is the best account of consciousness, there's like, maybe 5 different sort of strong theories of consciousness that are out there, and each one is going to have some drawbacks to it. I'll put that out on the table. Each one is going to have some element of weirdness to it, mostly given the fact that, like, consciousness is just a very weird sort of thing. I mean, it's something that we're, like, first and foremost, like, aware of, given our epistemology, but it's still, we don't have any, like, strong analogous things that we can, like, relate it to. So anyway, in sort of, like, I think that the best way to sort of, like, come to a preferred theory of consciousness is to weigh out what are the drawbacks to each of these theories, because there's going to be a drawback to it. No matter what the theory is, there's going to be a drawback that's counterintuitive, and then you weigh out these counterintuitive elements against the other theories that are there. So, like, as a panpsychist, I recognize it is very weird to say that electrons have something it's like to be themselves, and that, like, consciousness is all throughout nature, and there's going to be a concern regarding combination. Like, well, how's it that smaller consciousness can, like, add up to become bigger consciousnesses? And I don't think I'm committed to that exactly. I think there's a way in which, like, the panpsychist doesn't have to commit themselves to a type of combination of consciousnesses. But anyway, but there's going to be other sort of, like, drawbacks to every other position. And so it's like, recognize the drawbacks to your own position. Like, if you're maybe a property dualist, that you think that, like, mental phenomena is a sort of property of the brain, I think there's going to be some problems of epiphenomenalism there. Like, you might have to reject the sort of folk notion that we have some sort of mental causation, where, like, I can have reasons that are part of my experience that lead me to act in some sort of ways, because, like, properties, if it's just a property that's sort of like smoke wafting off of the campfire that is the brain, then the smoke itself isn't going to have any sort of, like, power over the brain and the rest of the body to do anything. And so, like, that's a sort of concern for emergentism in regards to consciousness, I think, at least. There might be ways to sort of try to avoid that, but I think then you might have a type of downward causation, which even to me still sounds like, well, maybe that's assuming a type, like, that might actually still be a type of substance dualism, where you have these two substances one that has causal power over the other, or like a sort of like causal connections between the two. And so it's still a type of dualism there. So anyway, there's a variety of problems. I'm sure Craig and Ron know there's some a bit of there's a bit of like concern with idealism as well. It is somewhat strange to say that things don't have physical properties in themselves, that they can exist independent of any minds. But anyway, so but yeah, like I think that the philosophy of mind has a lot of really interesting elements to it. And so like if you're curious and inquisitive and you want to like really think about what are the options available to me, I think it could be a really fruitful sort of exercise to like look into the various philosophies of mind out there and try to see what and try to compare them against each other. Like don't like even as like if you can come into it with your own theory of mind that you have outright, but still recognize there might be a better one out there that you could, I don't know, just give it a shot.
Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Did you know
What,
Anakin
John?
Harris is a panpsychist?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, what I would say is what you refer to, John, is something called abduction, not induction or deduction, but abduction. Trying to, this is by C.S. Pierce, who was strongly influenced by William James, and he thought of this view called pragmatistic. That's as opposed to William James' pragmatism. A lot of people have the view that pragmatism is simply, if it works, it must be true. Well, that's a crude understanding. Abduction, in the pragmatic understanding, is to what difference would it make by taking this explanation, this theory, as opposed to some other theory. So abduction is the view that what economically explains a whole host of phenomena, just in case your said theory was true. And what I've argued, and what I've tried to argue, and what I think we've all tried to argue in here today, is that we've tried to argue by inference to the best explanation, as in Richard Swinburne and other people, other authors and philosophers, to try to give what viewpoint best explains a variety of phenomena. I think theism, best understood as in an Aristotelian commonsensical position, best understands the causal dispositions that we have, taken causality as a real thing in nature, and I think I think it incorporates a lot of panpsychism. I don't think panpsychism is false. I think it's incomplete and finds its completeness in Aristotelianism. But I think we can all agree that materialism, that there are a number of views that show materialism is false. And I would simply say to the materialist to keep on searching, keep on looking, keep an open mind and an open heart. We need an explanation that accounts for all the data, not tries to reduce some of the data or all of it to mere chemical and physical processes that don't have even a rational explanation. So I think y'all have given great, and y'all as in everybody in this room, given great answers for why materialism is dead. And I just think it remains that way.
Yeah, I just want to add, honestly, atheists in the argument you laid out there, that is affirming the consequent, where you're saying if A, then B, therefore A. So you might want to rework the argument a little bit to see if you can get it so it's logically valid. So, okay,
well,
sorry.
guys, no, thank you. And thank y'all for all coming on here and all the things you've said. You've given some great content for our viewers. But if you're listening, if you're receiving this broadcast and especially if you are a Christian, you are the resistance. Thank you for everybody.
Amen.
And I appreciate it. God bless y'all all.
God bless.
Hey, if you want